The town of Dundee hummed with the quiet, unassuming rhythm of life. The cobblestone streets glistened faintly under the drizzle that seemed to be a constant companion, while the murmurs of passers-by blended with the distant clang of a tram bell. It was the kind of place where time moved gently, unhurried, and people found comfort in its familiar routines. Amidst this tranquil backdrop, two figures sat in a dimly lit corner of a small, bustling pub on Nethergate Street. Barry Delaney leaned back in his chair, his legs stretched out under the table, the leather of his worn boots cracked and stained. He nursed a pint of lager in one hand, while the other gestured animatedly as he told a story, his voice rising and falling with dramatic flair. Across from him sat Kevin Elliott, his posture straight, his uniform crisp despite being off-duty. Kevin's laugh came easily, a soft, genuine sound that punctuated Barry's words. Together they seemed to radiate an energy that filled the small space around them. Barry and Kevin had been friends for as long as they could remember. Their bond was forged in the rough and tumble days of schoolyard fights and late-night escapades, tempered by the shared experience of growing up in a working-class town. Barry was the joker, the one who could lighten even the darkest moments with a well-timed quip or an exaggerated tale. Kevin, on the other hand, was the steady one, the anchor who kept Barry's flights of fancy from veering too far off course. Together, they were inseparable, two halves of a whole, but tonight there was a shadow over their usual banter. Kevin was leaving in the morning, bound for another deployment with the British Army. It wasn't his first tour, but this one felt different, heavier. Barry could see it in the way Kevin's eyes lingered on the familiar surroundings, as if he were memorizing every detail. "You're too bloody serious tonight, Kev," Barry said, breaking the momentary silence. He took a long sip from his pint, his eyes studying his friend over the rim of the glass. "You're not getting soft on me, are you?" Kevin chuckled, but the sound lacked its usual warmth. "Just thinking, that's all." "You know about how things change," Barry snorted. "Things don't change, mate. Not here, anyway. You'll go off, do your soldier thing, and come back to this same old pub with its same old smell of fried chips and spilled beer. And I'll still be here, holding your spot at the table." Kevin didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached for his own drink, his fingers brushing the condensation on the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more introspective. "You ever think about what would happen if one of us didn't come back?" Barry froze mid-drink, the question catching him off guard. He set his glass down, a frown tugging at the corners of his mouth. "What kind of talk is that? You planning on going somewhere I don't know about?" Kevin's lips curved into a faint smile. "I'm serious, Barry. What if?" For a moment, the noise of the pub faded into the background, leaving just the two of them in their little corner. Barry leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "All right, you want to talk about it? Fine. If something happens to me, you better make sure everyone knows I went out like a legend. None of this tragic hero nonsense. I want people laughing at my funeral, not crying." Kevin's smile widened, the first hint of genuine amusement breaking through. "Laughing, huh? What do you suggest? A comedy show?" Barry grinned, his mischievous spark returning. "How about this? Whoever goes first, the other one has to show up at the funeral, wearing the most ridiculous outfit they can find. Let's make it something people will talk about for years." Kevin raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Ridiculous how?" "I'm thinking something completely out there. A pink dress, with green polka dots, maybe? The sillier, the better." Barry's grin widened as he leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with his suggestion. Kevin laughed, a full, genuine laugh that drew a few curious glances from nearby tables. "You're mental. You know that?" "Yeah, but you love me for it," Barry shot back, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Come on, shake on it. Pink dress, green polka dots. It's a deal." Kevin hesitated for only a moment before extending his hand. Their palms met in a firm handshake, sealing the pact. Deal. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter and stories, but the unspoken weight of Kevin's departure lingered in the air. When the time came to leave, Barry walked Kevin to the station. The platform was quiet, the distant hum of the approaching train the only sound. Kevin turned to face Barry, his expression unreadable. "You take care of yourself, all right?" "You too," Barry replied, his voice uncharacteristically serious. He reached out and clapped Kevin on the shoulder. "And don't you dare make me wear that bloody dress." Kevin chuckled, a soft, bittersweet sound. "I'll do my best." As the train pulled away, Barry stood on the platform, watching until it disappeared into the night. He shoved his hands into his pockets, the chill of the evening seeping through his jacket. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of unease, a nagging sense that something was about to change. He shook it off, turning to head back into town. Kevin would be back. He always came back. The days after Kevin's departure blurred into a monotonous cycle for Barry. The pub on Nethergate Street no longer felt the same without Kevin's steady presence across the table, his laughter rising above the hum of the other patrons. The emptiness gnawed at Barry, a quiet, persistent ache that settled in his chest. He tried to drown it out with routine, with work, with more pints than he cared to admit, but the absence was palpable. Kevin's first letter arrived a month later, the envelope slightly crumpled from its journey across continents. Barry recognized the familiar neat handwriting on the front and felt a rush of relief as he tore it open. Inside, Kevin wrote about the heat of Afghanistan, the strange taste of the food, and the camaraderie among the soldiers. He mentioned the dangers, almost in passing, as if they were a distant, abstract concept. "It's not as bad as I thought it would be," Kevin wrote. "The guys here are solid, and we've got each other's backs. But Barry, mate, you wouldn't believe how bloody hot it is. I'm pretty sure my boots melted to the ground yesterday." Barry laughed at the image, the sound startling in the quiet of his flat. He sat down to write back immediately, filling the pages with updates about Dundee. Mrs. Thompson's cat had gone missing again, the local bakery had started selling something called a cronachine, and the pub had a new bartender who poured the worst pints Barry had ever tasted. He ended the letter with a playful jab. "And don't get too used to the heat, Kev. I'm not dragging your sorry arse back here if you turn into a pile of ash." The correspondence became a lifeline, a thread connecting their vastly different worlds. Kevin's letters grew more candid as the weeks turned into months. He wrote about the fear that crept in during the quiet moments, about the sound of gunfire in the distance, and about the friends he'd lost. Barry read every word carefully, his heart clenching at the weight of Kevin's experiences. He tried to match Kevin's honesty in his replies, sharing his own struggles. Unemployment, a failed attempt at a relationship, the creeping sense of stagnation that came with life in a small town. One letter arrived later than usual, the handwriting more hurried, the tone heavier. Kevin admitted that he was scared, that something about this tour felt different. "I don't know how to explain it," he wrote. "It's like this place is trying to tell me something, like it knows I won't be leaving. Sounds daft, doesn't it?" Barry crumpled the letter in his fist, his jaw tightening. He grabbed a pen and scrawled a response that was equal parts anger and desperation. "Don't talk like that, Kev. You're coming back, you hear me? You've got no choice. I've already picked out that pink dress for your funeral, and I'm not wasting it." He regretted the words as soon as he sent them, the joke feeling hollow against the unease that had settled in his gut. Days turned into weeks, and then the letter came. Barry had just returned from the pub when his phone buzzed with a message from one of Kevin's army friends. He stared at the screen for a long moment before opening it, the words swimming before his eyes. "Barry, I'm so sorry. Kevin's gone?" The room spun, the air rushing out of his lungs. He dropped the phone onto the table, his hands trembling. Kevin was gone. The words didn't make sense, didn't feel real. He sank into a chair, staring blankly at the wall, as the enormity of the loss began to sink in. The days that followed passed in a haze. Barry went through the motions, his body on autopilot, while his mind reeled. Friends tried to console him, but their words felt distant, disconnected. The only thing that pierced the fog was the arrival of Kevin's final letter, written just days before his death. Barry, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I'm sorry, mate. I really thought I'd have more time. But listen, you better not back out on our deal. I want you there, loud and proud in that ridiculous dress. Make them laugh for me, Barry. Promise me. Barry read the letter over and over, the words blurring through his tears. He clutched the paper to his chest, a choked sob escaping his lips. Kevin had always kept his promises, and now it was Barry's turn. The preparation for the funeral was both surreal and excruciating. Barry wandered through the shops in Dundee, feeling the weight of every glance as he searched for the perfect dress. The memory of Kevin's laughter echoed in his mind, giving him the strength to push through his discomfort. He finally settled on a bright green dress, pairing it with pink socks in a nod to their original pact. The day of the funeral dawned gray and cold, a light drizzle misting the air. Barry stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the straps of the dress and smoothing the fabric over his chest. He caught his reflection and let out a shaky laugh. You'd bloody love this, wouldn't you, Kev? The church was packed, the solemn faces of Kevin's family and friends filling the pews. Barry felt their eyes on him as he entered, the dress a glaring contrast to the somber black attire around him. He held his head high, his steps steady as he approached the front of the room. Standing before the casket, Barry's composure faltered. He reached out, his hand trembling as he touched the polished wood. I'm here, mate, he whispered, just like I promised. When it was his turn to speak, Barry took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. He looked out at the sea of faces, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. Kevin was more than my best friend. He was my brother. And if he were here right now, he'd be laughing his arse off at this dress. That's who he was. Someone who could find joy in the darkest moments, who wanted people to smile even when it hurt. So today, let's honor him the way he would have wanted. Let's remember the laughter, the love, the ridiculous promises. Let's remember Kevin. The room was silent for a beat before a wave of applause broke out, the sound filling the church. Barry stepped down, his heart heavy but full of a quiet pride. He had kept his promise. Kevin would have been proud. The days following Kevin's funeral unfolded like a surreal dream for Barry. The bright green dress he had worn, the one he had chosen with so much care and a mixture of dread and defiance, hung on the back of a chair in his bedroom. It seemed to dominate the small cluttered space, a garish reminder of promises kept and the painful emptiness left in Kevin's wake. Barry spent most of his time in his flat, the curtains drawn against the gray Dundee skies. The usual clamor of the city, trams rattling down the streets, distant conversations floating through the open windows, barely registered. The world outside continued, unchanged and unrelenting. While Barry felt as if he were moving through quicksand, weighed down by grief. But amidst the haze, there was a flicker of something else. It started with a single photograph posted online by a mutual friend who had attended the funeral. The image captured Barry, standing by Kevin's casket, dressed in the absurdly bright green dress, his face a portrait of raw emotion. The post read simply, "A promise kept for a friend." At first, Barry paid little attention to it. Social media was the last thing on his mind. But within days, messages began pouring in. Texts, emails, even handwritten notes left at his door. Friends, acquaintances, and complete strangers reached out to him, their words full of gratitude, admiration, and shared grief. They thanked him for his courage, for honoring Kevin in such a bold and heartfelt way. Some shared their own stories of loss and friendship, drawing strength from his act. It was overwhelming. Barry didn't know what to make of it. He hadn't done anything remarkable, as far as he was concerned. He had simply kept his word. And yet, the messages kept coming, each one a reminder that Kevin's memory had touched more lives than either of them could have imagined. One evening, Barry sat at the small desk in his flat, surrounded by letters and emails. He sifted through them slowly, the words blurring together in his tired mind. But one message caught his attention. A letter from a young woman named Sarah. Dear Barry, I lost my brother in Afghanistan 2 years ago. Your story gave me something I haven't felt in a long time. Hope. Seeing the love you had for your friend, the way you celebrated his life, even in the midst of your grief, it reminded me of the good times with my brother, the laughter and the joy. Thank you for showing me that it's okay to smile again, even when it hurts. With gratitude, Sarah. Barry read the letter twice, his throat tightening. He set it down carefully, his hands trembling. For the first time since Kevin's death, he allowed himself to cry. Not the quiet, restrained tears he had shed at the funeral, but deep, unguarded sobs that left him gasping for breath. It was as if Sarah's words had unlocked something within him, a dam breaking under the weight of his grief. The next morning, Barry woke with a sense of clarity. Kevin had always wanted to make people laugh, to bring light into the darkest corners. And in some strange, unexpected way, Barry had done that for him. The green dress, the ridiculous socks, the absurdity of it all. It had been Kevin's way of ensuring that his memory would bring joy, not just sorrow. Barry decided to take a walk. Hive hadn't left the flat in days, and the crisp morning air felt like a balm against his tired skin. As he strolled through the familiar streets of Dundee, he found himself drawn to the church where Kevin's funeral had been held. The building loomed ahead, its stone facade weathered but steadfast, a silent witness to so many lives and stories. At the back of the churchyard, near Kevin's grave, Barry spotted a small group of people. They were gathered quietly, some laying flowers, others simply standing in silence. He approached hesitantly, unsure if he should intrude. One of them, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, turned and recognized Barry. His face lit up with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. You're Barry, aren't you? The one from the funeral? Barry nodded, feeling a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. Yeah, that's me. The man stepped forward, extending a hand. I'm Harry Gladstone. I serve with Kevin in Helmand. I just wanted to say thank you. What you did at the funeral. It meant a lot to all of us. Kevin was one of the best, and you honored him in a way none of us will ever forget. Barry shook his hand, his throat tight with emotion. I just kept a promise. That's all? Harry smiled. Sometimes, keeping a promise is the hardest and most important thing we can do. As the days turned into weeks, Barry began to find a sense of purpose in Kevin's legacy. He started attending gatherings organized by veterans and their families, sharing stories of Kevin's humor, his loyalty, and his unyielding spirit. He spoke of the pact they had made, the laughter it had brought, even in the face of loss. One evening, he was invited to speak at a charity event for wounded soldiers. Standing before a room full of strangers, Barry felt a familiar wave of nerves wash over him. But then he thought of Kevin, of the way he had faced every challenge with quiet strength and a wry smile. Barry took a deep breath and began. I'm not a soldier, he said, his voice steady, despite the lump in his throat. I'm just a bloke who had the privilege of calling one of the best men I've ever known my friend. Kevin Elliott was more than a soldier. He was a brother, a son, a mate who could make you laugh even when you didn't think it was possible. And when he made me promise to wear a ridiculous dress to his funeral, it wasn't just a joke. It was his way of reminding me, and all of us, that even in our darkest moments, we can find a reason to smile. The audience was silent, their eyes fixed on Barry. He continued, sharing stories of Kevin's life, his dreams, and the bond they had shared. By the time he finished, the room erupted into applause, a standing ovation that left Barry humbled and overwhelmed. In the months and years that followed, Barry's story spread far beyond Dundee. The photograph from the funeral became an enduring symbol of friendship, loyalty, and the power of laughter in the face of loss. Barry received letters from people all over the world, each one a testament to the impact Kevin's legacy had left behind. But for Barry, the most meaningful moments were the quiet ones, the visits to Kevin's grave, where he would sit and talk as if his friend were still beside him. He would share updates about his life, his struggles and triumphs, the people he had met, and the lives Kevin had touched. One afternoon, Barry brought a small, framed photograph to the grave. It was a picture of the two of them, taken years ago at the pub. Kevin was laughing, his arm slung around Barry's shoulders, the kind of carefree joy that seemed to radiate from him. Barry placed the frame carefully against the headstone, his fingers lingering on the cool stone. "Miss you, mate?" he whispered, "but I'll keep telling your story, I promise." As he walked away, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the nearby trees. Barry paused, glancing back one last time. The photograph caught the sunlight, the image of Kevin's laughter shining brightly against the gray stone. And for the first time in a long time, Barry smiled. If you like this story, support the channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing this video with your friends. Don't forget to check out our catalog for more touching and inspiring stories. Thank you for watching.